parts that we don't even know what they do yet, and certainly utilize parts that we do know. And this again is being engaged in different experiences, not just your regular scientific data that you might really love putting together in mathematical formulas, but great literature, great music, great conversation, nature, all these kinds of things to activate, to stretch us out of our comfort zones, to stretch us out of our safety zones, and certainly our cultural zones that hinder necessary transformation. So complexity enables us to adapt more consciously is where I'm going with this. It's one of the things that I think that we need to help us adapt more consciously, to overcome inability that Senor Oviedo talks about. It's one of the things he kept asking about. How do I get people to overcome inability? And I think this idea of using our complexity and adapting more consciously helps us overcome that inability, that place where we can't mobilize, we can't act, we don't know, either we don't know how, we don't have the tools, or we don't have the motivation, or we simply just don't have the education and understanding. So this, complexity is exciting to me because it also creates conditions for evolutionary development. The more complex a system is, the more potential for evolutionary development. And this is probably one of the most exciting things to me about ecopsychology, because I don't know how we're going to tackle these issues if we don't evolve in a mature manner. And question our evolution, question how we're participating in it or not. So resiliency, this is a picture of a neuron. Neurons in our brain, it's been color-coded for other reasons, but to talk about complexity and intricacy, this is our brain, on a projector, if you will. It's very beautiful, it's very complex. So resiliency and plasticity are connected. They co-respond to each other, and they promote and encourage imagination. So if we're trying to think, how can I imagine something to be different? Well, we can't just sit there and try to will imagination. We cultivate imagination. So we're using our complexity. We're tapping into our complexity. We're, trying to fire off neurons and make new connections. And that means we open opportunities. We educate ourselves in a variety of ways. So that scientists look at the humanities, and those in the humanities, have the courage to look at the data and not be intimidated by it. We've got to cross over, I think, into these educational sectors so that we promote this imagination. As much as imagination promotes and encourages resiliency and plasticity, which of course we talked about earlier today. What I'm winding down to say here is I think our most challenging issues that you all know probably much better than I do: overpopulation, gender equality, extraction, social and economic injustices, trafficking of arms, people, wildlife, guns, drugs, climate change. These are all interconnected issues. The issues that we talk about here at the Congress are not separate issues. They're all interconnected, interdependent, intertwined, complex, complicated, which is why I think we can tackle them, because we too are complex, intricate, complicated. So we bring the best of who we are to these issues. But I don't say that lightly, because again, I think it's extremely, extremely difficult to try to change things psychologically. For one, we don't even like the word. It makes us feel like something is wrong, or that we need therapy or something like that, whatever all the negative associations with being psychological are. I hope that we leave with a little bit different idea of that today, that psychological or psychological underpinning or having a psychological perspective is really just having a much more perceptive ecosystem of perception and capacities. But again, I'm trying to get back to this thing about narratives and the reason that they're complex and complicated, and how our stories go into everything that makes who we are and everything that we design in the world. So if this image looks complicated to you, and if you don't think you can trace one strand to the other side, that gives you an idea of how difficult powerful it is to make changes in a simple issue, psychologically. So the narratives that we choose to live by are important, and if we can't create a new one, a more sustainable one, then we're going to revert back to the old ones that are already in place. And those will include, the tragedy of the commons that we still work with, eroding goals where we have value systems that butt up against each other and don't work together, policy resistance, and certainly addiction. So what's critical to understand here and understanding the power of a personal or collective story is because it organizes our perceptions. These mythologies, these narratives, whether you've ever given them a thought or not, but the ones that we live by as a culture, the ones that we certainly live by personally, our belief systems, they organize our perceptions about things. They're sort of our filter. Everything comes in through them and goes out through them. They form our view of ourselves, others, and the world, which is why we hold on to them and don't want to change them. Change is threatening because we can't imagine how it's going to be on the other side of change. As we change a story, that means we're changing something about ourselves, and that is threatening and scary because we don't know what we're going to be on the other side. Will I still be liked? Will I still be loved? Will I still be admired? All those kinds of things go into that on the other side of change. So this collective myth of genderization, and how would we work with something as complex and complicated as that? Gender inequality, basically, being one of the most destructive practices on the earth and the planet, is held in place by the personal and cultural narrative that values one sex over the other, that sees sex as an intrinsic biological characteristic, that there are two and only two sexes, male and female, that sees gender role styles as culturally defined expressions of sex and gender, meaning there are only two genders, two gender role styles, masculine, men, boy, male, and feminine, female, girl, women. This already is very outdated. We know there's, around the world, there's up to 7 gender styles. So we're already operating off a very old way of thinking about gender. The collective myth of genderization also believes that those who don't fit their expected gender roles are the result of an imperfect socialization or psychological pathology. And finally, the belief that by virtue of evolutionary selection processes, those persons who are males, boys, or men deserve greater social status, authority, and power, and access to resources than those who are females, girls, or women. So that's sort of the crux of this whole gender mythology or gender inequality. And I think it's kind of interesting. I never had the opportunity to meet one right, but I wish I had. She said something that I wanted to just use as an example because I think it's very interesting, her working so hard with gender inequality in her own country and community. I think, and I want you to listen to this again with your ecopsychological ear, your metaphorical ear, and I'll be interested to see if you hear some of the same things that I heard from it when I read it and felt from it too. I think it is very important to move within the boundaries we can accommodate within our cultures, within our religions, while trying to minimize the aspects that hold women back, and also don't want to put women on a platform where they would feel uncomfortable to compete. It's difficult for women to move ahead without alienating themselves from the society to which they want to belong. Partly it is our own traditions, our poverty and attitudes, even our religion, and that continue to hold women back. It is here that men play a much bigger role because they are often the protectors, enforcers of traditions and religions. Did anything stick out to any of you in this paragraph? Anything pop out? Okay. I think that she really is on the edge of trying to work this particular mythology of gender inequality. She captures the tensions in the culture, certainly the religion and the individuals, yet you can see, or I can see, that she's still struggling with how to change this particular mythos. For example, what? Yeah, it's important to move within the boundaries. So, again, we can't step out of the boundaries. That's difficult. To accommodate our culture, not to question the cultural mythology. While trying to minimize the aspects that hold women back, we don't want to put them on a platform that might make them feel uncomfortable to compete. That is holding women back. And it's difficult to move women ahead without alienating them from the society or culture they belong to. This suggests to me a sense of shame embedded here. And I just want to touch very briefly on shame. That shame is connected to this dehumanizing narrative of genderization for both men and women. It's not just on behalf of women that feel shame from this. Because there's a psychological link to feeling exposed to degradation, whether you're a man advocating for a woman to have equal rights or not, you may still be going against the culture, and that can produce cultural shame.
Well, also that the woman will be kicked out of the family home, and therefore she has no means of survival. So that's a very strong incentive to perform.
It sure is. Shame. No one wants to be shamed. So the public scorn, self-scorn, one's respect is doubted, or respect is doubted or attacked when shame comes into the particular narrative. And these can make us feel less than. So why would you want to try to change something when you would have to deal with this whole thing of shame? And remember, shame means to cover. The old word means to cover. It's a huge topic. We can't go in and do it obviously today. You can spend the entire day talking about shame, but they do it when we want to. It's very hard to. But it's very important to this particular mythology. In that it also has the power to make people feel completely worthless, degraded or degraded from head to toe, unlovable and unworthy of living. So it's a very, very strong and powerful feeling. But it also has the ability to promote differentiation and individualization in the sense of one findings one's own identity outside of family and culture. And if you've ever done that yourself, you know how difficult that is to go outside of family and culture to find out who you are. And of course, you carry that shame with you until you're able to work that through. And that's a very deep one to work through. So you many times can be remedied, or can be motivated by shame to remedy the situation. But that doesn't mean it counteracts the entire narrative. It means that you just maybe have stepped out of it to find your own identity, your own sense of self, but the larger issue is still in place. So shame is a soul injury, I think, for both men and women, because it's how we observe the other. And if we observe the other as less than, and we know we're being observed by the other as less than, that produces shame in both parts. And I think that's a very, very difficult one to work with. So you can see the many complex connections between shame and genderization. So changing this myth, how do we change this narrative? How do we change a particular mythology that has held, long-held behaviors and practices in place? Well, for genderization, we would need to de-genderize genderization, or deconstruct it in a sense, take it apart. And we would start, in a sense, by looking at what we did earlier, trying to understand what's the mythology that holds genderization in place, and I've shared some of that with you already. And every culture has a mythology that holds their traditional male-female mores in place. So to de-genderize, or to change this particular mythology, we need to create a new narrative, a new story to replace it, but one that was equitable, honorable, respectful, and therefore, I would advocate sustainable. So how do we do that? Because this is as much a personal task as it is a cultural task. We can't necessarily do it overnight. We may each have to do it on our own and really ferret out what we think and feel about gender inequality and begin to change our own story around that. We actually may believe, and certainly there are women in the United States that seem to believe that gender inequality is okay. And I mean, that blows my mind. In the 21st century in the United States, we have a very split country around this issue still. So we're not so ahead of the rest of the world, we're sort of behind it in a lot of things. So changing this particular mythology, degenderizing, is changing the myth from the old story that says Earth is female and is mother, that again has endless resources and capabilities and can be exploited. It is an old mythology that says roles should be based upon gender hierarchy rather than what people can do best and their capacities more. Women are less than men or boys, so they have particular roles that are less than. It says there's no value in being female or woman. Again, I'm generalizing this mythology, but it applies to a lot of cultures. There is no value in being female or woman. A goat is worth more than a woman. Women, because less than men, cannot have access to certain foods, areas of land, farmland, medicine, contraception, technology, choice of vocations, education, trade, economic power, or voice. And it also says that one part of our brain is male and one part of our brain is female, and we operate from these two very disconnected sides. And therefore, women are only capable of certain ways of thinking and certain ways of being because of this. So these are parts of the old genderization mythology. If we were to change that story, it might sound like something like this. To degenderize it might sound like this. Earth is a living entity unto itself. Something that every woman wants. She wants to be one unto herself. And I would advocate that Earth is a living entity unto itself. A new story might sound like women are separate from Earth as are men, but as a part of nature, they both have roles as Earth citizens upon the planet. So we too are an ecosystem within multiple ecosystems on the planet, and we have roles and responsibilities toward these ecosystems, all these ecosystems. It might sound like humans have equal value. Humans have equal value and have equal value with other species. We might say that there's equal access for all humans if we were to change this story. There's equal access for all humans to education, technology, medicine, contraception, food, land, vocation, representation, culture. That women have unequivocal rights over their body. And I might add, if I were creating a new story around humanity, I wouldn't even use the word a new story around gender. I would use a new story around humanity, that we would have an ecopsychological ethos, that there is an earth-human relationship. And as we treat ourselves respectively, honorably, ethically, we also treat the earth in the same manner. So, changing a narrative or a myth or a belief system is extremely difficult. It requires education, I think, as a main tool, a main platform to begin even the conversation of, because you need to be educated on what the story is and how it was formed. I think we need to use a variety of approaches to changing mythology so as not to offend and not to shut people down or shutting the entire culture down or community down around a very, very sensitive issue of changing personal and cultural mythology. And I think it requires an aesthetic sensibility. It requires almost a sense of eros, that there's a deep connection that we care about equality in the world. Creativity, sharing of stories, sharing of literature and music, and actually even technology. There's been lots of work that have come out of communities that have brought in videos to show skits and plays that reflect back to the culture the gender inequality or whatever particular issue they're trying to educate the culture on. And so they watch the skit or the video, and it actually is playing out their cultural narrative, and they get it. And they may laugh, they may get angry, they may cry, they may whatever, but then they start to think about the story, the narrative, and the behavior, and what that has meant for the way that they live. So these things, expand the culture. It creates culture to help us demonstrate the myth being lived can be changed. Time and natural growth, of course. Novelty, doing things that are new, a new way of thinking, a new approach to something. It's why I've been so involved in ecopsychology. It feels like a new way of thinking, certainly toward myself. Ingenuity, innovation. Of course, these all encourage empathy, respect, sense of community. So when we change a myth, we have to work very closely, hands-on, on the ground. It's not like today we do a lot of talking and questioning and that kind of thing. It is a hands-on work on the ground to work with a lot of the different individuals that all